Good morning. I was listening to this podcast, this new one I found. I think it's called like the Knowledge Project or something, and I can't remember who the host is, but he interviews people and it's just like sharing, very wise people and just sharing knowledge. And he had Ryan Holiday on. You know Ryan Holiday. Ryan Holiday is awesome. I read his book. I think you told me about his book, Discipline is Destiny, a couple years ago.
Discipline is Destiny.
And so listening to that episode back, it was like an hour and 40 minutes. And it got me thinking, like, we should put together an episode around Stoicism. You've heard the word Stoic or being Stoic. And like, what does that really mean? How far does it go? I didn't realize, we're talking like a Marcus Aurelius days and Roman Empire and all this stuff. And Ryan Holiday is all about it. But Discipline is Destiny is a great book. And, it's all about achieving excellence and, practicing temperance with alcohol and, all sorts of things in terms of, things in moderation and whatever. And it's just a really good read. So I think topic today, this episode, let's talk about some Stoicism. I know this is a big one for you.
It is a big one for me. It's been life changing, and Stoicism's having a moment, man. And I've reflected a lot on why that is. And I think it's because being so ingrained in the self-help world, dudes historically are not into self-help. Right? We figure it out, hard work, keep the emotions at bay. And if that's your motto, Stoicism is your philosophy or your self-help. But that's where I wanted to kind of start off, is for the listeners that may not know this. We refer to a lot of men, mostly men, women can be it too, obviously, but, he's a Stoic. He's the strong, silent type. He doesn't have emotion. That's not what we're talking about. Which is important to call out, because it's all about feeling the emotions and mapping to your values and controlling what you can control, right? To me, Stoicism in a nutshell is the ability to control what you can control and not pay or give your energy and emotion away to the things that you cannot, what's in your circle. So as a starting point there, just wanted to call that out, because Stoicism's having a hot moment. And I think that's why, because it's the masculine self-help.
Yeah. So what do you mean it's having a hot moment? Like, what are you seeing out there in the world? And like, obviously we know Ryan Holiday is kind of like the poster boy for this stuff, but.
You nailed it on the head. Ryan Holiday has brilliantly modernized Stoicism with those books that we talked about, Discipline is Destiny, the way he calls out Lou Gehrig in that book.
Oh yeah.
Oh God. I loved it. He's tying into modern stories on how Stoicism, all the pain that Lou Gehrig went through and isolated the physical pain of his career and just focused on baseball and what he could control in those scenarios. And taking a step back, my first taste into Stoicism was Seneca, which I'll talk about a little bit more here in a bit, but it's a book called On the Shortness of Life. And I presented a little bit about this at Junto on your life in years, and meditating on your death, that most people don't like to do because we're scared of it. Very healthy to meditate on your death and how short life is. And Seneca, it's a short book, listeners. Get through it. And I think it's an hour on Audible. But On the Shortness of Life, it's a little bit of old language, but it hits so true on your decision-making, everything we talk about this podcast and how you're approaching time. And Seneca is one of my favorite Stoics. Anyway.
Yeah, I remember that story, that Lou Gehrig story in that book that you brought up just a second ago. I think if I remember correctly, wasn't he like out partying and he was drinking a lot, and he was like, and he was still performing at a very high level, but a
lot of those baseball players were at that time.
Yeah. And I mean, a lot of them still do, but it was like his hitting coach had said something to him, or I think it was like, even like a minor league coach. I don't even know what it was. I can't remember exactly, but he was like, dude, you're tearing it up, but you're not going to get very far. If you want a long career, you got to refocus and see, cut some of that stuff out. And he changed it. He had practiced. That's where temperance came. And I think he went into the full temperance conversation in the book. And Lou Gehrig went on to be, who we all know and love in the Baseball Hall of Fame, which will be fun to walk around Cooperstown in about 6 months with my boys' baseball team and check out all that stuff. But yeah, I mean, Stoicism, like, I think you and I have we have this. There's times to be stoic, and there's times obviously where we have our emotions on our sleeve and we open up and vulnerable and whatever. But I think there's a unique ability with Stoics who can compartmentalize shitty situations.
You just took the words out of my mouth. I was thinking about a conversation you and I had. I can picture us on the patio up at the lodge at a fantasy draft, and I was telling you how much I could tell and appreciate your ability to compartmentalize, but it also being, like many things, strength can be a weakness.
Yeah.
You compartmentalize too much and you can find yourself almost living different lives. So it's something to monitor, right? As we're auditing the space between our ears. What are we compartmentalizing? Why are we compartmentalizing it? Why do I need to segregate these things?
Yeah.
But we do need to, right? You're not the same person in the boardroom that you are at the Little League game. Hopefully not.
Yeah.
But we are also trying to live authentically. So here we get into the paradoxes in my head of what's the right answer, and there isn't.
Yeah, and I mean, you're right. Compartmentalize. It's almost like picking your spots. You don't want to compartmentalize to the point where you're not sharing anything, and it's like, and then all of a sudden you blow up or something terrible happens or whatever. But it's my idea of compartmentalizing is I don't want any crappy situations to ruin the experience that I'm having with others right now. I don't want to bring that to the table and
firewalls
bring them down, right? Yeah. And so I think I remember that cabin trip, and I remember you mentioning that to me, and there was, obviously something personal going on, but I didn't want to, it was going to be a great weekend, and I didn't want to bring the group down by, getting vulnerable at that point. But I was like,
until I kept chipping away at you and pressing you on it.
I know. But, and then it was great, right? We had the conversation, and it was, we opened up and whatever, but I think that's a piece of it is there is strength in not outwardly showing emotion at every corner, because it's possible that you overreact and maybe it's not that big of a deal. And that's kind of how I look at things too. Like, it's almost like I'm not going to share it with you until I think it's a big deal. And then all of a sudden someone will tell me it's a big deal. It's like, I never thought it was a big deal. Why is this a big deal? And so it's just kind of a weird deal. And I think I don't know if it's taught. You can tell me if this is just something that you're kind of born with. I think Ryan talks about how he had some level of it, but it was, he had to work on it. And it wasn't something he was just born with to the level that he's at.
It's 100% not something, and it's our conditioning in childhood, mostly before the age of 7, and things, traumas, capital T, lowercase t, significant events that you might not even want to call trauma. Some people hate that word, but it shapes you. It shapes the conversation you have with yourself. It shapes your subconscious decision-making. And the part of Stoicism that landed with me and has become a part of my brand and what I'm trying to help other people with is life is hard enough, challenging enough. We're lucky to live it. And we can master our perceptions to avoid unnecessary suffering. And that's what I realized in my 20s is, and this gets into self-sabotage. You create your perception of the world and suffer in things in your head that never come into fruition. Mark Twain has a huge quote. It's something I've been through so many trials, tribulations, and punishment in my life that never seemed to ever happen.
Yeah.
And we do this to ourselves all the time. And that's that living in the future. Yeah, we got to predict, we got to plan, we got to strategize. But we cannot start committing to a future that hasn't happened yet, problems that haven't even appeared.
Yeah.
That's the beauty of Stoicism.
Oh man, you nailed it on the head. Like, especially through like year end and our busiest time, like there will be things that like I'll go to sleep. I'm like, oh my gosh, tomorrow's gonna be brutal. It's just, I know that this is gonna happen. I know that this is gonna happen, whatever. And you wake up in the morning, you knock like 2 things off that list. You're like, oh, well, that wasn't a big deal.
Now we have momentum.
Right.
It's the act of chipping away at it. And it's so easily, listeners, we know that this is easier said than done, but all we're trying to do is convey what we're going through and keep that memory.
To it.
It's reminders, dude. It's a practice.
It does take practice, but equanimity is a word that I think it was Ed Milet's book, The Power of One More. And he mentioned practicing equanimity. And basically that means, can you handle difficult situations with a calm demeanor? And that's similar to Stoicism. It's basically the same thing. It's kind of where Marcus Aurelius almost, I don't think he was the founder. So I can't remember who Seneca was, right? The founder or the originator of it.
Epictetus was before them. Yeah.
But yeah, so Marcus Aurelius is one of the most famous Stoics that, Holiday talks about. And, he went through how many wars, and as an emperor of Rome, like just the stuff he would go through, and just did it in a way that was philosophical and calm and cool and collected, and just did it the right way from what we
Plague,
know.
famine, war, loss of children, loss of. You think your problems were bad? Trying to lead an entire empire with every single thing going on. You think COVID was tough for the president? Your entire country's dying.
Yeah.
For multiple different ways. And to be able to sit down, we get back to journaling, him collecting his thoughts and meditations shows you what he was going through. And he wasn't doing it for us. He was doing it to stay sane, to get his thoughts out of his head. As the empire, he's trying to keep it together by strings.
What is your, do you have a story that you can share about Marcus Aurelius? I know I just watched Gladiator 2, which is a phenomenal movie. I think Gladiator 1 still takes the cake just because the first one's always the best.
It's also factually incorrect. So
I'm sure it is.
It's amazing, but I get a little heated when we show Joaquin Phoenix.
Right? Isn't it like the story where the gladiator is like Marcus Aurelius' son, and then the Gladiator 2 is the grandson?
And they're trying to restore the republic.
Yeah.
They don't want it to be an empire. Marcus Aurelius wanted a republic by the people for the people. And other people in the Senate wanted an empire. They wanted complete power, and that's where Gladiator 2 picks up anyway. But I think with Marcus Aurelius, a story for myself, it's like it reshaped sales for me. As you're approaching sales and this whole what's in my circle, what's not in my circle, thinking 3 quarters from now, that's not my control. What's my control are my daily activities. What are the things that I know I can do repeatedly in the minutia that aggregate and produce results? Because as soon as your head goes to outcomes, closing or losing, you're already off the ball. It doesn't matter. It's executing each step, what's within my power, my team, who's trying to get this thing done. The way Marcus Aurelius says, you have power over your minds, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. It comes back to that decision by decision by decision, simplification of one choice. What is the one choice that aligns to your massive transformative purpose? Make that choice, not the comfortable one.
I'm glad you brought that back kind of to the real world and brought that to sales. Because I mean, in the workplace, whether you're in sales or not, or you're a team leader or whatever, you know, things are going to come at you and everyone's going to have opinions about certain things and how you act and how you do things in company culture and policy or whatever, right? You put together some things and people are going to have a perception of how it's supposed to go or what they thought they heard or whatever. And as a team leader, you've got to stay composed under pressure with your team. You got to stay composed under pressure in the busy seasons of your, cycle. If you have seasons during crises, obviously the mistakes happen, things happen. And if you're not stoic in those, if you're not practicing stoic principles in those situations, that's when like the bad decisions and quick decisions and the blow ups and just matters get worse. And it's like, fires have to be put out in business and in the workplace. And if you're the leader that is the one that's putting out fires, you will not be put in that position, or you won't do that very well if you don't have the ability to step away, assess the situation, figure out what is going on, like figure out what happened, what's going on, and how to communicate to get it, to fix it. And then also how to fix it, whether it's yourself or delegating or whatever, but giving people the proper tools to fix it. And so in the workplace, you see that a lot where people they react so quickly and oftentimes negatively before they even realize what's happening. And it's like, wait a second, it's not that bad. And even if it was that bad, we're going to get it fixed, And so I understand your frustration, but let's figure this out. The goal, we have the same goals.
It's so true. And probably another reason Stoicism is having a hot moment, because the complexity is making that even harder these days. I wanted to take it back to Epictetus, who have some really interesting draws to Viktor Frankl, Men's Search for Meaning. We talked about it up at Summit. He was the one that survived a Holocaust camp, all about stimulus and response and the decision time between, and how people survived. The ones that survived in the Holocaust camp versus is the ones that perished. And Epictetus was born a slave. So a similar situation. He was in really dire straits, a very rough living, but he chose inner freedom. If he was free, if he felt he was free, then he could be free. And so one of his key takeaways was, it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it, what matters. That's a very common preaching these days with self-help, right? It's our reaction and our perception of the world that shapes how we operate and the experience we're having. And so Epictetus really framed up for Marcus Aurelius and Seneca and all the Stoics that really founding principle. And you're taking the power, right? This is Jocko, extreme ownership. This is Ed Milet. It's all the above. And we have the power to choose on what we are experiencing.
Well, and it's crazy you bring those guys up, right? Like, because, yeah, you said easier said than done, but these guys were like, Frank was a Holocaust survivor. Like, it's just not things that we run into, most people that are listening, especially this podcast, that are running into. And, but then there's issues in their life. And so it kind of puts things into perspective. Like, how can someone be born into these situations and have this mindset, mind over matter, of just like, I am free because I choose to be free, whatever that situation I'm in. Everything can be taken. What's the quote? Everything can be taken from a man, but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances. And it's all about attitude. It's all about mindset. It's all about perception. It's all about how you take things in and how you're going to exude those back out into the world. And are you going to let the negative situation keep you down and bring you down? Or are you going to are you going to continue working towards changing that perception, changing that narrative, and making these things into a positive and learning opportunities?
And you hit it on the head there. And what are you taking into the world? The activity, the creation over consumption? Because the trap that I was in when I picked this stuff up, I've got meditations right here. Actually, there's old Marcus right. There's Marcus right there.
He is.
And meditations here. I got Seneca actually sits on my nightstand on the shortness of life. And I'm reading all these books. I'm in bed, reading away next to Paula. Oh, did you know Marcus Aurelius says that? Reading all this knowledge, but Stoicism is not a philosophy you read. It's a philosophy you are reading and doing. And sure, the ideas are great, but you practice Stoicism. We practice meditation. We practice our sports and our business. It's a practice. You can philosophize all you want, but first become a king, then become a philosopher. Put your actions into the world, and then teach about how great the philosophy is.
Yeah, and I mean, coming from the parental side of things, you can practice. If you have kids, you can instead of getting mad or upset at their activities, well, let's have a conversation about why they thought that was okay, or what was going on in their mind when that happened, and you leverage that as a moment to, teach a lesson, as opposed to reacting angrily and leaving them with a sour taste. And I mean, that's tough. Like I'm not going to be the first dad in the world to say that kids are freaking annoying sometimes, and they come at you with all these things, and you're like, how am I going to deal with this? But then it's like, what? They don't know any better. They're only 10 years old. That's all they got. It's just their experience. So then you have an opportunity to teach them about, like, hey, we got to think about this a little bit differently, or this is why we're going to do this. And especially with youth sports or sports in general, same thing. Like, are you going to be the guy that's going to cry and be upset when you lose? Or are you going to be the guy that's going to shake the opponent's hand and let that roll off your back? And it kind of goes back to the be a duck mentality when things come at you out of your control.
I was just thinking about that, how you have made your own metaphor for Stoicism with the duck. That's exactly what the duck is.
Yeah. I mean, it's, for anyone that hasn't heard the story that I like to share, and I teach with my kids, I teach this, with my team, and, when things are out of your control, just like the duck on one side of the pond, their whole goal for the day is to get to the other side. It's all nice and sunny, beautiful day. They hop into the lake. They start swimming away. They're having a blast and splashing around and whatever. And they're halfway across the lake. And then a massive rainstorm comes out of nowhere and starts pouring down on them. And what does the duck do? Does it get all upset? Does it give up? Does it turn around and say, "Never, I'm not doing this"? No, the duck continues to push forward given the circumstances that were out of his control, knowing that those were the goals that he had, and lets the water roll off their back. It's how they're built. They have they get themselves all prepared and protected, and they got an oily substance they rub all over their feathers and whatever, and the water rolls off their back. And so I use that metaphor a lot, just when things get at you and you're like, oh, this sucks, or the refs did this, or this client did that, or whatever. Like, look, we can't control that. All we can do is assess the situation, figure out the best course of action moving forward that we can both end in a positive outcome, and let it roll off our back. Take a breather if you need to, but come back and keep on swimming.
You actually practice it too. It's not just something you put in the OppoFlow book or talk to. I see it in you in practice, and it's it's definitely a model of excellence. I wanted to talk also about some of the criticisms of Stoicism. We alluded to this in the beginning, talking about the compartmentalization a little bit, but sometimes Stoicism is perceived as overly unemotional or detached, borderlining on apathy. Like, okay, you're just not going to engage, and almost a selfish act, right? This doesn't affect me, you know. I don't see it that way. I can see the criticism when you're seeing both sides, because some people like to be more verbal with their emotions, what's going on, and express themselves. It's also can be seen as ignoring systematic or external issues, head in the sand, right? Mm-hmm. If I can't control politics and I don't watch the news for at least an hour a day, I've got my head in the sand. I'm not participating because it's out of my circle. Again, maybe valid, but there's a sweet spot, right? There's a lot of gray area here. And these are principles. They're fluid. And then the other one is back to the compartmentalization, which I think what I was getting to is it's misused as a means to suppress emotions rather than understanding or managing them. And I don't think any of these teachers, any of the Stoics were saying you should suppress it, because they knew that led to illness even back in the day. Literally, it's what becomes cancer and inflammation in your body. But it's a way to manage them. Keep them inside and manage them before you start expressing them, I think, is the key.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I mean, there's this whole chameleon aspect, right? Where you feel like it's almost like you blend when you're Stoic, you can kind of blend in a little bit. You're not ruffling feathers, right? Because you're not speaking much, or maybe you're keeping things close. And you know, there's a way of going about it without, if I don't share too much, I'm not going to piss anyone off, or I'm not going to make an impression really. But sometimes that does make an impression by not, sharing. But you have this stoicism of nothing rattles you, but it also, is anything back there? Like, I know you've got thoughts. I know that there's things going on. I know you care, but
I know things do rattle you. They do rattle you, but how you can suppress the rattle?
Yeah.
It's like shocks for the rattle.
Yeah, it's an interesting concept, man. It's putting a word on it. I think a lot of us do live this way. But I think there's a lot of people that don't. Like, it's just like the people that, they're honking their horn when you cut them off in the lane. Like, dude, slow down, like chill, And
this isn't religion, right? This isn't, Stoicism is not a silver bullet. Is it going to help? There are things you can take from that I promise you are going to improve your life and your perception of it. But just following this as your single point path, life doesn't work that way. It's a tool in the toolbox. It's a way of thinking. Build your own. Again, with the criticisms of positive, it's been super impactful for me. Is it dogma? No. Remind yourself, build your own philosophy, design your own operating system for this life. You want to include Stoicism, great. If not, find another practice or philosophy that lands closer, right?
Yeah. Yeah. A little off topic, but I heard this, I saw this quote the other day of like, if you're ever having, kind of a crappy day, or you're thinking you're not getting anywhere, you're kind of going 2 steps, and then back 3, 2 steps, back 3. You're like, man, I don't know. I just feel like I'm grinding or whatever. And it said, look at where you're at today, because 3 years ago, that was the dream. And it's such a good one. Like, it's such and there's other parts of life where, like, if you were to go, like, I remember when we went to Puerto Vallarta like a year and a half ago, and that big hurricane hit. And after the hurricane hit, we, got to get out into the jungle and do like an excursion or whatever. But there was like little towns that were decimated. And it's like, you just think about some of these people like Marcus, these people in the Roman empires, Seneca, and these people that are in these situations or put in these life situations that are still able to rebuild and still able to do the things that they need to do and do them well. And, you're like, man, my problems are just, like, why they're not that big of a deal in the grand scheme of things. Or even like what's going on, at the time of this recording, what's going on in LA with the wildfires. Like, it's terrible. And, you have people online that are like, oh my gosh, like, they're not there. Right. So it's hard to resonate with that. But at the same time, like, you're pissed off at the guy that just cut you off on the freeway when people are like getting their homes burned down. And now I'm not saying you always want to live like that because you're not in those situations, but still it puts things in perspective that little things are not that big a deal in the grand scheme of things. You're not even remember what happened tomorrow in those little things.
I love that you brought this up because I wanted to bring it up on the podcast with Jeremy Clevin, but we were rolling and flowing and didn't squeeze it in. I felt like I was forcing it, but it hit me really hard on what you just said, tying it to our December meeting, ending the year at Junto at Phoenix Country Club. And the fact that Chris Bosch was on the Tim Ferriss podcast and said, you know what, you look around, and if you go around in a circle and everybody puts their top problems out on the table and you get to look at them, most of the time you're going to pick your problems right back up and just run with those, because the devil, right? You know how you're going to try to solve these problems, as opposed to, oh, I see Steven's problems. I have no idea what I'm going to do with that. I'll just stick with mine. Yeah. And I was like, gosh, what a great reset. These are the problems I created, chose extreme ownership. I'll own these problems and figure out some solutions. And I just love that thought as a reset.
Yeah, that was a good one. Is that the pod? You got anything more on Stoicism?
I think I could go on for a while, but I think this is a great place to wrap.
All right. Check us out. YouTube, Spotify.
Read some Ryan Holiday.
Yeah, read Ryan Holiday. He's got more than just, so discipline is what is it? Discipline is Destiny. That's one of his newer ones. I think he just got done another one. But he's written 15, 20 books.
Incredible story. Maybe he'll be on the pod someday.
Yeah. Yeah, I think he should. Ryan, where are you? Jump on. Obstacle is the Way is one of his earlier ones. That's a really good one. But yeah, I think it's called The Knowledge Projects, where I heard it, and that's what kind of inspired this podcast. So check that. It's like an hour and 40 minutes. Did you end up listening to it on the flight home from Ireland?
Yeah, it's fantastic. I think I'd listened to it before, but I've listened to so much Ryan Holiday. He's done such great work and is really living what he preaches. He's fantastic. So
yeah, perfect.
That's a wrap.
We'll be back at you next week.